A duke, a widow, and the brother between them. She arrived hating him. She had promised at her husband's grave never to set foot in his house. But James left her no choice. 6 months under the same roof as the man she blamed for everything. 6 months to discover that the man she thought she knew, cold, absent, indifferent, had been sitting outside her husband's door every single night, waiting. Some silences are not empty. Some distances are not indifference. And some promises made in the rain were never meant to last forever. If you've ever loved someone who showed up quietly, subscribe. This story is for you. She had made a promise in the rain, not to God, not to the stone, to James. 14 months earlier, in a small churchyard on the edge of Bath, Vivian Hartwell had stood with her gloved hand pressed against the cool marble of his grave and spoken words that had felt, at the time, like an anchor. I will never set foot in his house. I won't go near him, I swear it. No voice answered. No sign appeared. The sky remained a low grey lid over the world. James, as always, kept his silence. She had held on to that silence for 14 months, as if it were a rope. The letter arrived on a Thursday morning and cut it clean in two. Vivienne was in the front sitting room of the modest Bath townhouse she had rented since James's death, watching weak winter light scrape across the opposite wall, when Catherine brought the envelope in on a small tray. "It has the Ashborne seal, my lady," Catherine said. That was enough to turn the air inside Vivian's lungs to glass. The seal had not changed. Dark wax, pressed with a hawk half poised, wings not yet fully spread. The crest of Ashborne Hall, a house she had visited exactly once 5 years ago as a bride, she broke the seal with a single, firm movement. The letter was from a London solicitor, Mr. Frank Alderton of Alderton and Marsh. The hand was neat, the phrasing careful, the tone apologetic in the way men learn to be apologetic when they are about to say something that cannot be helped. By the end of the first page, her mouth had gone dry. James's will, Mr. Alderton wrote, had left to her all of his personal belongings, his books, his clothes, his papers, the small collection of paintings he had assembled over a decade of deliberate, quiet pleasure. All of that was hers without condition. The Hartwell Trust was another matter. In the last months of his life, James had placed what remained of the Hartwell funds under a joint guardianship clause. The purpose, Mr. Alderton said, had been to shield her from pressure and opportunists while she grieved. The effect was this: to access any part of the trust, she must reside at Ashborne Hall, Derbyshire, for a continuous period of 6 months. During those 6 months, the co-trustee and co-signatory on all financial decisions would be Edmund Ashborne, Duke of Ashborne, her brother-in-law, the man she had promised in the rain never to go near. There was a note at the bottom in Alderton's careful hand. The clause cannot be set aside without surrendering the trust entirely. Vivian read the letter once, then again. "Catherine," she said, with a voice that sounded very steady, "begin packing. We leave on Monday." On the road north 2 days later, she watched England harden outside the carriage window. Bath's soft stone and tidy crescents fell away behind them. In their place came open country and rougher lines, hedges giving way to dry stone walls, then to stretches of moor, brown and grey under a low sky. Villages thinned and then scattered altogether. Catherine sat opposite her, knitting in quiet, patient rows. "The hall is said to be very grand," Catherine ventured after a long stretch of silence. "It is," Vivian said. "Have you been there often, my lady?" "Once," she said, "for the wedding." She did not add, and once was enough. Some thoughts were better left untranslated. Ashborne Hall appeared first as a pale shape in the distance, rising out of the last curve of the drive like a statement. The iron gates opened onto a straight, flint-white avenue of gravel, lined with bare oak trees. Their branches met over the middle of the road, forming a tunnel of dark, knotted limbs. At the far end, the house waited. 3 stories of pale stone, tall windows catching what little light the sky offered, a central door framed by columns that did not need anyone's approval. It was, in the way of such houses, impressive. It had never once felt like home. The carriage rolled to a stop before the broad front steps. A footman appeared, and another. Catherine began to gather their things. Vivian remained seated for a heartbeat longer than necessary, hand on the doorstrap, pulse steady only because she had insisted that it be. Then she descended. The front doors stood open. A woman in severe black stood just inside, hands clasped, posture straight as a rule. "Lady Hartwell," she said, inclining her head. "Welcome to Ashborne Hall. I am Mrs. Greaves, the housekeeper. Your rooms are prepared. His Grace asked me to say that he will receive you in the west drawing room at 6 o'clock, if that suits." "Thank you, Mrs. Greaves," Vivian said. Her voice sounded like it belonged to someone capable and calm. That was something. She stepped into the entrance hall. The marble floor threw back their steps. The ceiling rose high above them, painted and coffered, designed to make every visitor feel smaller than they had a moment before. A great fireplace yawned on one side. Light from the high windows fell in pale stripes across portraits. She kept her eyes on the staircase ahead. She nearly made it. Halfway across the hall, something at the edge of her vision pulled. A frame, larger than the others, newly hung if the shine of the gilding was any indication. Against her better judgment, she turned her head. James looked back at her from the wall. The portrait had captured him at 25, before illness, before the slow fading of his strength. He stood half-turned, as though someone had just called his name and he had looked up from whatever he had been doing. The painter had caught the curve at one corner of his mouth, the warmth in his eyes, the easy way he occupied his own body. He looked alive. For a moment the corridor tilted. She swallowed, and the world settled by degrees. "Catherine," she said. Her own voice sounded far away. "Yes, my lady." Vivian turned back to the stairs. She climbed without looking again at the wall. "You will not cry in this house," she told herself. "You will not give it that." On the landing she drew one slow, even breath, then another. Only then did she let Mrs. Greaves show her to her rooms. The west drawing room at 6 o'clock was lit by a real fire and the last thinnest strip of remaining day. A long window looked out onto the park. Heavy curtains framed it, held back by cords thick as wrists. Vivian arrived on time. He was already there. Edmund Ashborne stood at the window, hands behind his back, looking out at the darkening grounds. He wore a black coat, a white cravat, no jewelry save a simple signet ring. His posture was straight, without stiffness. His stillness had its own sort of gravity. He turned when he heard her step. "Lady Hartwell," he said. "Your Grace," she answered. She had seen him only twice before in any meaningful way, once at the wedding, once at James's funeral. In both memories he had the same quality he had now, composed, reserved, as if he had come into the world with a lid screwed tightly onto whatever he felt. He looked like James around the eyes. The set of his mouth was his alone. "I trust your journey was tolerable," he said. "It was," she said. "Thank you." A short pause. The fire shifted with a low sigh. "Mr. Alderton will come from London in a fortnight," Edmund said. "He will explain the practicalities of the trust in person. Until then, the household is at your disposal. Mrs. Greaves will see to anything you need." "I require very little," she said. "I recall," he said. He did not elaborate. She did not ask. "There is one matter I should mention." His tone changed almost imperceptibly. Not warmer, not cooler, only more contained. "The east wing is closed. I ask that you do not go there." She met his gaze. "The east wing," she said. "May I ask why?" "No," he said. "You may not." He offered the answer without arrogance or apology, as if stating the hour. The refusal landed between them like a stone dropped gently into still water. There was no surface disturbance, but she knew it would sink deep. "Very well," she said. "Thank you." He inclined his head by a fraction, a gesture that might have been courtesy or simple acknowledgement. "Dinner is at 8. You are welcome to dine here or in your rooms as you prefer. I do not require your company." That at least was honest. "In my rooms then," she said, "as you wish." She left the west drawing room with her spine straight and her face composed, and did not let herself think until the door had closed behind her. Later, in the bedchamber that had been prepared for her, fire lit, water hot, everything in place, she sat at the small writing desk and laid Mr. Alderton's letter flat on the surface. 6 months at Ashborne Hall. 6 months under the roof of a man she had promised at a grave to avoid for the rest of her life. 6 months of James on the wall. Catherine moved quietly about the room, unpacking, arranging. Now and then Vivian felt the girl's eyes on her, light and worried, but Catherine did not speak. Catherine understood, as good maids did, that some questions sit too close to the skin. Vivian folded the letter along its old crease and put it away. In the corridor below, a clock struck the hour. "You can survive 6 months," she told herself. "You have survived worse." She did not add that what she had survived before had not required saying goodnight to a man with James's eyes. Downstairs in the long gallery, oil-painted James watched an empty hall with his half-laughing smile, as if he knew more than he was able to say. At the end of that first day, when Catherine had banked the fire and the house had gone quiet around her, Vivian lay awake and watched the play of shadow on the ceiling. She saw, when she closed her eyes, not the grave in Bath, not the stone under her hand, but the brief tightening of Edmund's jaw when she had asked about the East Wing. A small thing, the sort of small thing a person might build into a wall. She turned onto her side and pulled the covers higher. If there was a wall, she thought, she had no intention of being the one to climb it. Not yet. Not ever, if she could help it. But the house, with its closed corridors and its new portrait on the wall, had the feeling of a place that did not intend to let anything remain as it was. And somewhere out in the dark park beyond the windows, though she did not yet know it, an old elm stood over its roots, winter bare, waiting for spring. Chapter 2. Breakfast Rules and Silent Wars. The first rule of Ashborne Hall revealed itself at breakfast. Vivian came down at 8:30 on her first morning, expecting, without quite realizing she expected it, to find Edmund at the table. In most houses, the master made a point of being seen at the start of the day. The long dining room was empty. A single place had been laid at the side of the table, not at the head. A footman poured her coffee with the solemn efficiency of a man who had been warned that this particular guest was not to be mishandled. "Does His Grace breakfast elsewhere?" she asked. "At 7, my lady," the footman said. "In here. His Grace has already eaten." Of course he had. She ate alone and thought about how convenient it was to miss a person by exactly 90 minutes. The next morning she came down at 5 minutes to 7. He was at the head of the table, a cup of coffee by his right hand, a letter in his left. He looked up at her entrance. The surprise in his face was there and gone in the space of a breath. "Lady Hartwell," he said. "Your Grace," she said. A second place appeared at the table with quiet, efficient speed. She sat 2 chairs down from him, the distance wide enough for formality. He returned his attention to his correspondence. The fire gave the only sound in the room for a few minutes. "Is the estate very large?" she asked at last. He did not answer at once. He finished the line he was reading, folded the letter, and set it aside. 14,000 acres, he said. 3 tenant farms, the home farm, the village, the mill at Ashton Cross. James spoke of the village, she said. He said it was almost pretty in summer. His gaze flickered, the smallest change, like a candle stirred by a draught. "It is," he said. He reached for his coffee. His hand was steady. The knuckles, she noticed, were not. She did not push further. Not yet. By the end of the week, a pattern had set in. He was always in the dining room at 7. She was always there at 2 minutes past. They exchanged the same few words, good morning, slept well, the weather, and then retreated into silence. It was not an empty silence. It had contours. There were times when it sat light between them, the simple, companionable quiet of 2 people sharing a room. There were other mornings when every clink of cutlery sounded like a question not asked. On the 3rd morning, she chose a different chair. Instead of sitting 2 places down, she took the seat to his right. He looked up at once. "Good morning," she said. "Good morning," he said. The footman's hands never faltered as he rearranged the plates. He read a letter. She spread jam on her toast. The space between them felt smaller in a way that had nothing to do with inches. "Saw you were watching the East Wing from the garden last night," he said without looking up. She stilled. "I was walking," she said. "You stopped," he said. "You looked at the windows for some time." "You were watching from the house," she said. A pause. "Yes." He turned a page. She let a heartbeat pass. James always said the east wing had the best view of the moors, she said. His jaw tightened. It was a very small movement, but she had begun to learn his small movements. He was right, Edmund said. It does. They let the subject rest, though it did not feel at all settled. Some parts of the house became hers without formal agreement. The library on the south side, with its 2-story shelves and upper gallery. The morning room, bright even on dull days. The back garden, where she could walk until the cold bit the tips of her fingers through her gloves. He kept to his own paths. The estate office, the stables, the study, the village. She could feel him in the house even when she did not see him, the way one is aware of a fire in another room. On the 4th day, she told Catherine in passing that the library armchair by the window was too stiff to sit in for long. The next morning, a different chair waited there, lower, softer, angled toward the light. No one mentioned it. No one needed to. On the 5th day, a sudden wind off the moor cut through her cloak as she walked the grounds. She returned to the hall with her teeth set against a shiver. Mrs. Greaves met her with a heavier shawl. "His Grace asked that this be kept to hand for you, my lady," she said. Vivienne took it and said only, "Thank you." She thought about the shawl at dinner, while Edmund discussed tenant repairs with the steward, and she pretended to be more interested in her soup than in the line of his mouth. It was easier and harder when he was like this, not kind, not unkind, simply considerate in small unannounced ways. It did not match the man she had built in her head over 14 months. That man had been easy to hate. The first open clash came at dinner at the end of the 2nd week. They had taken, without formally deciding to dining together in the evenings. She sat halfway down the table on one side, he at its head, the distance filled by candles and serving dishes and a careful politeness that had begun to wear at her nerves. She told herself she tolerated it for James's sake. Halfway through the meal, in a pause between courses, she said in a tone that sounded idle even to her own ears, "I understand you locked James's old rooms." The air between them changed. "Who told you that?" he asked. "Does it matter?" she said. "Yes." She held his gaze. "One of the maids mentioned it. She said the east wing has been closed since the funeral. She said you locked his door yourself." The scarred wooden table under its pristine cloth suddenly felt like the most solid thing in the room. He set down his knife with care. "The east wing is closed," he said. "I asked you not to go there." "I haven't," she said. "Yet." A muscle moved in his cheek. "I don't intend to turn your servants into liars on my account," she went on. "So I suppose the question stands, why lock his rooms?" His reply took a heartbeat longer than usual to arrive. "Because the room is no longer in use," he said. "There was no need." "That is not why," she said. Silence. The candles crackled softly. "You locked his rooms," she said, "and you expect me to believe it was nothing more than efficient housekeeping." The line of his shoulders went very still. "You seem very certain of what you expect from me," he said. "Yes," she said. "I am." Her voice had hardened without her permission. Underneath the words a tide was rising, one she had kept very carefully contained for more than a year. "You were not there," she said. "At the end. You were not at the house. You were in London or here or wherever you disappear to when things are difficult, and James—" Her throat tightened. She forced the rest out. "James defended you. Even when he was too weak to stand, he defended you." The quiet that followed did not feel empty. It felt heavy, as if the walls were listening. Edmund's hand closed around the stem of his wineglass, not hard enough to break it, just enough that the tendons in his hand stood out stark against the skin. "I know what you think of me," he said at last. "You have made it very easy," she said. He did not answer. He picked up his glass, drank and set it down again, all with that same controlled economy of movement. "Excuse me," he said. He left the dining room without haste, without apparent anger, without anything at all on his face that she could read. The door closed behind him. She sat at the long table alone, hands rigid in her lap, heart beating far too fast, and told herself that this was good, necessary, honest. If it felt like something had broken, that was simply the sound of truth arriving. Later, when the dishes had been cleared and the house had gone quiet, Vivienne stood at the top of the main staircase in the dim light and looked down along the corridor where James's portrait hung. From here, she could see only the edge of the frame. She thought about going to stand in front of it. She turned instead toward her bedchamber. Down below, somewhere in the dark depth of the house, a door closed with a soft, final sound. She had no way of knowing then that Edmund Ashborne was spending his nights in a chair in the corridor, outside a locked door in the east wing, refusing to open it and refusing, just as stubbornly, to stay away. That would come later. For now there was only the promise she had made in the rain, the 6 months that had begun and the quiet war she had just declared, across a table full of candles. Chapter 3. The Man at the Head of the Table. The first guests arrived in carriages glossy with recent polishing and dust from the Derbyshire roads. Vivienne learned about the dinner 2 days before it happened, from Catherine, who had it from a kitchen maid, who had it from Mrs. Greaves. The chain of information in great houses was often more efficient than any official notice. Lady Forsyth and her son, Colonel and Mrs. Beaumont, Mr. hail from the neighbouring estate, Catherine recited while sorting gowns. 12 to table, my lady. Mrs. Greaves says it was arranged before you came. Of course it had been. The world did not stop because she had been dropped back into this house like a stone into a pond. On the night itself, she stood before the tall mirror in her room while Catherine fastened the last hook of a deep blue gown. The colour was dark enough not to seem frivolous, the cut elegant without suggesting she was trying to impress anyone. You look like yourself again, Catherine said softly. Vivienne met her own eyes in the glass. I'm not yet sure who that is, she said. But it will do. The drawing-room hummed with polite conversation when she entered. Lady Forsyth, a compact woman in her 60s, with a sharp eye and a sharper tongue, was installed on a sofa near the fire, holding court over Mrs. Beaumont and a younger woman Vivienne did not yet know. A tall, ruddy man Vivienne took to be Colonel Beaumont stood with Edmund near the mantel, discussing something in the measured tone of men talking about land or Parliament. Heads turned as she came in. The moment of silence that followed was not long enough to be rude, but it was long enough for her to feel it. Lady Hartwell, Edmund said, crossing to her with a swiftness that betrayed, for once, no calculation. May I present our neighbours? His hand hovered near her elbow, not quite touching, guiding her through the introductions. Lady Forsyth greeted her with frank curiosity. Mrs. Beaumont offered sympathetic warmth. The younger woman, Miss Forsyth it turned out, looked at Vivienne as though at an especially interesting page in a novel. Old Mr. Hale was the last to be introduced, his hearing trumpet under his arm. Terrible business, losing a husband so young, he boomed. Terrible. But Ashbourne Hall is a fine place to be sad in, what? There was a slight collective wince. Yes, Vivienne said evenly. The house is very fine. Edmund's profile, just at the edge of her vision, had gone a shade harder. At table, Edmund took the head, Lady Forsyth the opposite end. Vivienne sat near the middle on his right at the place of honour that came with being both widow and topic. She did her duty. She spoke when spoken to, enough to be agreeable, not enough to invite questions she did not intend to answer. She could feel Edmund at the end of the table, not watching her, not obviously, but aware of her in the way he seemed aware of the whole room at once. It happened halfway through the second course. Mr. Hale, who had been happily relating some story from 20 years earlier to the unfortunate man on his left, turned his attention to Edmund with the abruptness of the partially deaf. Fine thing you've done, Ashbourne, he said loud enough for half the table. Taking on the title so young, running the place. Shame your father went when he did, of course. And poor James. He shook his head. Such a charming fellow. Always thought he had the better end of it, mind you. Freedom of a younger son, no burdens, just pleasure. The conversation around them thinned. A silence opened in the space of 3 words and tried to stretch. Mr. Hale, Lady Forsyth said, with the smiling firmness of a woman who has spent a lifetime redirecting old men away from conversational cliffs. You must tell Colonel Beaumont about that business with the river flooding the lower fields. You remember? But Mr. Hale was not to be steered. Terrible thing, a title falling on a man so early, he went on. All that weight, none of the fun. James had the fun, Edmund had the work, always said so. Vivian's knife stopped halfway through a piece of lamb. Edmund did not look down the table. His posture did not change. Only his left hand moved, closing around the stem of his wine glass, the knuckles tightening for a fraction of a second. "Yes," he said, in a tone that could have described the weather. James had a talent for finding pleasure where others would not. His gaze flicked just once toward Vivian. She felt it like a touch. Colonel Beaumont, seeing the danger now, leaned into Mr. Hale's line of sight and raised his voice. "And you, sir, must tell me about the renovation at your West Field. I hear you've installed a new system for drainage." The conversation reorganized itself. The tension sank under the surface like something heavy. Vivian did not eat the rest of her lamb. Later, when the ladies had withdrawn to the drawing room and the men stayed behind with their port, Lady Forsyth settled herself beside Vivian with the air of someone taking up a better view. "My dear," she said, pouring herself tea, "may I be impertinent?" "You may try," Vivian said. Lady Forsyth's eyes warmed. "It is very odd, you being here." "Yes," Vivian said calmly. "It is." "People will talk," Lady Forsyth went on, not unkindly. "A young widow, a bachelor duke, 6 months under the same roof. They talked already when the will was read. They will talk more now." "I am aware," Vivian said. She kept her tone light. "I imagine it must be a welcome change from discussing the weather." Lady Forsyth laughed. "You have spirit," she said. "Good. You will need it." From across the room, Miss Forsyth watched them with bright interest. Mrs. Beaumont pretended not to listen and failed. Vivian lifted her tea to her lips and did not spill a drop. The carriages took the guests away by 11. The house exhaled. Vivian stood in the entrance hall, waiting for Catherine to bring up a shawl she had left in the drawing room. The marble floor held the echoes of the evening. Footsteps, laughter, the particular strain of performing ease. Edmund stepped out from the dining room, loosening his cuffs. They met at the center of the hall, under the high ceiling with its painted plaster and the cold eyes of long-dead Ashbornes. "Thank you for suffering the evening," he said. "Lady Forsyth is impossible to dissuade once she has decided the county requires entertainment." "She is formidable," Vivian said. "I find I almost like her. She has that effect." They might have parted there. It would have been the most sensible thing. Instead, she said, "You didn't contradict him." He went still. "Mr. Hale," she said, "at dinner, you let him speak of James as if he were a boy at leisure and you the plodding steward of his joy." "He spoke carelessly," Edmund said, "as he often does." "He spoke as if you resented him," she said, "as if being duke was some burden you never wanted that fell on you by misfortune, while James danced free." He regarded her for a moment, and in that moment she saw, for the first time, how tired he looked. Not physically. Somewhere deeper. "Mr. Hale enjoys old stories," he said. "He leaves out the parts that do not suit his version." "And what is your version?" she asked. He glanced up at the portrait of some long-dead ancestor, then back to her. "I took what was mine to take," he said. "James took what was his. It is not as complicated as people like Mr. Hale want it to be." "It seems complicated enough from where I stand," she said, before she could stop herself. "You with the title, James with the debt. Me here because of a clause he wrote in the dark." Her voice had risen. She forced it down. "At the end," she said more quietly, "he was the one in pain, and you were not here." Edmund's jaw tightened. "I was here," he said. "Not when I was," she said. "Not when he could see you. Not when he—" Her breath caught. "He defended you," she said. "Even when I cursed your name, he found excuses for you. He said you were busy or away or occupied with the estate. He always had a reason." "You were grieving," Edmund said. "So was he," she said. They stood in the middle of the great hall of Ashborne Hall, the ghosts of generations looking down, and for the first time the distance between them felt like something sharp instead of something empty. "You should know," she said, "that his last kindness to you made it much easier for me to despise you." The remark landed. She saw it, a flicker at the edge of his control, the brief tightening of his fingers at his side. She half expected him to leave again. He did not. "He always did overestimate me," Edmund said. The words were calm, the eyes were not. "Good night, Lady Hartwell. Good night, Your Grace." He walked away down the corridor. His footsteps did not echo. On the stairs, on her way up, she heard Catherine's quieter tread behind her. "My lady," Catherine said, catching up, "one of the maids told me something after dinner. I don't know whether I should repeat it." Vivian paused on the landing. "If it concerns me," she said, "you should." Catherine lowered her voice, though the hall was empty. "She said His Grace had the east wing closed the month after Lord James passed," Catherine said. "She said he locked your husband's rooms himself." "Yes," Vivian said. "I heard." Catherine hesitated. "She also said he goes there, late, some nights, just stands at the end of the corridor. No one sees him go in." Vivian stood very still. "Why would he do that?" she said softly. "If he doesn't care." Catherine had no answer. Vivian climbed the rest of the stairs without speaking, her hand light on the rail. In her room she did not immediately undress. She went to the window and looked out over the dark sweep of the park instead, the lawns faint under the clouded moon. Somewhere out there, past the formal gardens and the clustered oaks, the land sloped away toward the north. She could not see the elm yet. She could feel the shape of something waiting all the same. Chapter 4. The letters in the upper gallery. She found the box on a day that looked like all the others. Grey light. A raw wind pressing itself against the windows. The sort of morning that made the library feel like the only habitable room in the house. Vivian had taken to wandering the upper gallery when she wanted to think without being seen. The narrow walkway ran along three sides of the library, lined with books that seemed to have been placed there more by instinct than system. She liked the sense of being above and apart, looking down on the orderly chaos below. She was searching for something that would occupy her mind more than her heart, a history of the northern counties perhaps, when her fingers brushed wood instead of leather. Behind a row of botanical prints, a flat wooden box lay pushed back against the shelf. For a moment she only looked at it, then she drew it out. The lid lifted easily. Nothing was locked in this house except the one door that mattered. Inside, 3 neat bundles of letters lay tied with different ribbons, cream, green, and a faded red. The handwriting on the topmost envelope in each bundle was the same. James. Her throat tightened. She sat down where she was, on the wooden floor of the gallery, the box between her knees. The cream ribbon letters were addressed to her. She set them aside. The green ribbon letters bore no full address, only a single initial on the front of each, E. She untied the bundle and opened the first. E. The doctor came again today. He said what he always says, which is to say very little. Vivian pretends not to be afraid, which is kind of her, but I know her too well to be fooled. I miss the house. Is that absurd? Tell me the north field still floods every spring, or I shall be very offended. J. She read all 11. They traced 8 months in James's careful slanting hand, talk of doctors, of harvests, of the old elm in the park that kept appearing in his dreams, small observations about Bath, jokes at his own expense, questions about tenants, lines about Vivian, always with the same rough tenderness. He complained about the taste of the medicine and the bedside manner of the physician. He spoke of Edmund with a familiarity Vivian had not expected. She had imagined in her worst moments that the brothers had been not merely distant but estranged. The letters told a different story. The last in the green bundle was dated 6 weeks before he died. E. I need to ask you something, and I need you to understand I am asking, not commanding. I know that distinction will matter to you. When I am gone, look after her. Not with lectures, not with that way you have of being right about everything. Just be there. She is braver than anyone I know, but she will be angry, and grief makes people throw stones at the nearest solid thing. You are solid. You always have been. Some of that anger will find you because I won't be here. Let it. She thinks she hates you. She does not. She hates the situation, and you are the nearest representative. Also, for once in your life, tell someone what you are feeling before it is too late to matter. I am extremely tired of being the only one allowed to guess. Give my love to the elm. J. Vivian closed the letter and sat very still. The library below her creaked softly as the fire shifted. The house murmured to itself in distant footsteps and far doors. She became aware that her hands were shaking. The version of Edmund she had built, cold, uncaring, absent, did not match this. A man who received letters like these and did not answer in kind would be a monster. He was not a monster. He might be many things, but not that. She slid the green bundle back into its ribbon and set it gently in the box. The cream ribbon letters waited. She took them and held them to her chest for a moment before she could untie the bow. She did not hear him come up the stairs. She became aware of him the way she had become aware of him in the portrait gallery. By the change in the air, the subtle shift that comes when another person enters a space you thought was yours alone. He stopped at the top of the steps. For a heartbeat, neither of them spoke. Then Edmund said very quietly, "You found them." She looked up. He stood a few paces away, his gaze on the box, then on the bundle in her hands. He looked less like a duke and more like a man who had just walked into an old wound. "I wasn't looking," she said. "Not for these." "I know," he said. He came closer, but not too close, and lowered himself to sit on the low shelf opposite her. It was the first time she had seen him choose the floor over a chair. "The green ones were to you," she said. "They were," he said. "He wrote every week." "Yes." "Did you answer?" "Yes," he said. "Of course." A beat. "He knew I would. He always knew." There it was again, that deep, complicated thread between the brothers, so obvious here, so absent from the narrative she had carried around in her chest. She held out the green bundle. "I read them," she said. "I shouldn't have, but I did." "I would have in your place," he said. He did not take them back. His hands stayed on his knees. "He loved you," she said. "I know," he said, and this time the words cost him. She looked at him across the narrow space. "Why didn't you tell me you were here at the end?" she asked. His jaw flexed. "You didn't ask," he said. "I did," she said. "I asked with every accusation." "You asked in a way that did not want the truth yet," he said. "You needed something simple. I am not a simple answer." Her laugh came out harsher than she intended. "No," she said. "You are not that." He studied his hands for a moment, as if choosing which truth he could afford. "I was at the hall," he said at last. "The last week. I came from London as soon as Alderton wrote. James knew I was here. He asked me not to come into his room." She swallowed. "Why?" "He said he did not want me to see him that way." A beat. "And he did not want to see me that way. And you obeyed him." "I always have," Edmund said. It was not pride, not self-pity, just a small exhausted fact. She thought of James's last green letter. "You have always been solid. I am tired of being the only one allowed to guess." "Where were you?" she said. "If you were not in the room." "In the corridor," he said. "Outside his door." His voice did not change. The words did. "Every night," he said, "until it was over." Silence opened, wide and deep. She imagined it. James on one side of the door, Edmund on the other, each obeying the other's limits, each bearing more than he said. It was painfully, perfectly, like both of them. "I spent 14 months, she said slowly, "hating you for not being there." "Yes," he said, "and all that time you were sitting on a chair outside a closed door." "Yes." Her eyes burned. She blinked hard. "Why didn't you contradict me?" she asked. "At the funeral, in London, just now at dinner." "You could have told me." "Because your version of me was useful," he said quietly. "You needed somewhere to put what you were carrying. I could hold it." She stared at him. "That is either the most arrogant thing I have ever heard," she said, "or the kindest." "James used the same words," he said. A faint wry note touched his mouth and vanished. She believed him. Her gaze dropped to the cream ribbon bundle in her hands. "These are for me," she said. "From him." Edmund nodded. "He asked me to give them to you," he said, "when you were ready." "And you decided when that was," she said. "I thought I did," he said. "I see now that you did." Their eyes met and held. Something eased, just slightly in the space between them. Not forgiveness, not yet, but an adjustment. The structure of her anger shifted, weight redistributing around new information. "I'm going to read them alone," she said. "Of course." She stood, tucking the letters against her chest. At the head of the stairs she paused. "James said the elm at the north corner was still standing," she said without looking back. "In his letter, the last one to you." Edmund's answer came without hesitation. "It is," he said. "It always has." She nodded once. Then she went down, cream-ribbon letters held close, a new understanding pressed in beside the old pain. The war between them was no longer as simple as she had wanted it to be. It was, inconveniently, honest. Chapter 5. Midnight in the Portrait Gallery. The portrait gallery waited at the end of the east corridor like a memory someone had forgotten to bury. Vivienne had avoided it since that first glimpse of James on the wall. Now, 2 weeks after finding the letters, she found herself standing at its entrance at midnight, candle in hand, unable to sleep. The house was deep in its night rhythm. Fires banked, floors cool, the only sounds the settling of old wood and the distant patter of rain against the panes. She walked the length of the corridor slowly, letting the candlelight pick out faces from the dark. Ancestors, distant dukes, women in stiff lace, none of them James, until the last. He looked out from the canvas exactly as she remembered, half-turned, mouth curved at the corner, eyes warm with whatever amusement he had been interrupted by. The painter had captured him 6 years ago, before the weight of illness, before the end. She stopped before it. The candle flame wavered. Shadows moved across his face. "I miss you," she said to the painted eyes. The house did not answer. She did not hear his approach. She felt it first, the shift in the air, the way the quiet took on the shape of another breathing person. Her candle threw his shadow long across the stone floor before she turned. Edmund stood 10 feet away, his own candle raised. He had stopped the moment he saw her. Neither of them spoke. She saw in the low light that he was in shirt sleeves, no coat, no cravat. His hair was not perfectly ordered. He looked for the first time since she arrived, not like the Duke of Ashborne, but like a man who had come to the same place she had, for the same unannounced reason. He moved closer, slowly, not breaking the stillness. He stopped before the portrait. They stood side by side, candles between them, looking at James. "He's very like you here," she said at last. "The painter complained," Edmund said. "James wouldn't sit still, kept turning to look at something." "That sounds right." "Yes." The quiet between them was different from every other quiet. It held weight but not hostility, shared ground, fragile and new. She became aware of the space between them. Inches. The warmth of him reached across it. He did not look at her. He kept his eyes on the portrait. "I sat outside his door every night," he said. "The last week. He knew I was there." She nodded. She had read that in the letters. "I could hear him breathing," Edmund said. "Sometimes he would shift in the bed. I would think, that's it, he's calling me, but he never did." Her throat tightened. "Why didn't you go in anyway?" "Because he asked me not to," he said. "And because," he paused, measuring, "because I knew it would be the last thing I ever did for him." The words hung in the candlelit air. She looked at him, really looked. His face was half in shadow, the line of his jaw taut, his eyes fixed on James, as if the portrait could tell him what to do with this moment. She saw the exhaustion in him then. Not the kind that came from work or weather, the kind that came from holding grief in every muscle for 14 months without letting it show. A single tear tracked down his cheek. He did not wipe it away. She did not move to comfort him, not yet. She let him stand in it. The tear fell, caught the candlelight, was gone. "He defended you," she said quietly, "even when I didn't want him to." "I know," Edmund said. She took half a step closer. Their shoulders were nearly touching. "Why?" she asked. He turned his head. Their eyes met. "Because he saw me," he said simply. "All of me." And he stayed. The words landed soft and heavy. She reached out. Her hand found his arm, rested there lightly, not pulling him closer, just present. He did not move away. They stood before James's portrait, hands touching, candles burning low, and the grief between them was no longer something to fight over. It was something to share. The silence lasted minutes, or an hour. Time did strange things in candlelight. She became aware slowly of the rain outside. Steady, not violent, the sort that settled in for the night. Edmund turned fully toward her. "Vivienne," he said. Her name in his voice was different from how anyone else said it. Lower, deliberate. She looked up at him. His hand rose, hesitated, then cupped her cheek, thumb brushing away dampness she hadn't noticed. It was the lightest touch, barely there. But it was everything. She leaned into it, closed her eyes. When she opened them, he was closer, his face inches from hers. She could have stepped back. She didn't. He bent his head. His lips brushed hers, not demanding, not testing. Certain. The kiss lasted as long as it needed to. Soft. Steady. A question answered in the asking. When he lifted his head, his hand stayed on her cheek. She looked into his eyes and saw for the first time, no barrier, only him. They stood there after, foreheads nearly touching, breathing the same air. "I should have told you sooner," he said, "about the corridor. About everything." She shook her head slightly. "James knew you would wait." Edmund's mouth curved, the ghost of a smile. He was always right. Insufferably, she agreed. The candles guttered. Wax dripped. "We should go," she said. He nodded, but neither moved. His thumb traced her cheekbone once more. "Good night," he said. "Good night." She walked back to her room with her candle held high, the portrait gallery behind her, the shape of his mouth still on hers. In the east wing corridor, at the end where no one went, Edmund stood a moment longer. He looked at James. Then he touched the frame, just once, turned away. The house swallowed the sound of his steps. The next morning at breakfast, Edmund was already there. Vivienne sat beside him. Their hands brushed when reaching for the tea. Neither pulled away. "Mrs." Greaves paused in the doorway, tray in hand, and said nothing. But the house knew. Chapter 6. The Challenge from Bristol. The letter arrived on a Thursday morning, delivered by a mud-spattered rider who had clearly pushed hard from London. Edmund was in the estate office when Mrs. Greaves brought it to him. He broke the plain solicitor's seal and read it standing, the paper crisp between his fingers. By the time he reached the breakfast room, his jaw had set in a line Vivienne had learned to recognize. "Trouble?" she asked, setting down her tea. "Alderton," he said shortly. He crossed to the table and unfolded the letter between them. She leaned in to read. Gerald Hartwell Esquiers of Bristol had filed formal challenge to the Hartwell Trust. Grounds: Lord James Ashborne had not been of sound mind when executing the guardianship clause. The required 6 months' residence at Ashborne Hall was therefore invalid. The trust must revert to the Hartwell family line. Alderton's assessment followed in careful paragraphs. The challenge had just enough legal footing to delay proceedings. Funds frozen pending review. Estimated 3 to 4 months. Vivienne sat back slowly. Her fingers tightened around her cup. "Gerald," she said, tasting the name like something bitter. "Your cousin," Edmund confirmed. His voice was even, but his eyes held a cold edge. "He's been waiting." She tapped the letter once hard. He knew the terms. "He's been watching the calendar." Edmund's gaze flicked to her, then back to the page. "Alderton thinks the same." She stood abruptly, walked to the window. The park lay grey and damp under a low sky. "Why now?" she asked the glass. "He could have challenged months ago." "Because you're still here," Edmund said behind her. "The 6 months is public record." "He's betting you'll leave rather than fight." She turned. "If I leave?" "The clause breaks," he finished. "You forfeit everything. He gets the trust." Her laugh came sharp and humorless. "He doesn't even want the money. He wants to win." Edmund folded the letter with deliberate care. "Alderton says the position is weak, but persistent. It will drag." "How long?" 3 months. 4. Longer if Hartwell finds new angles. She crossed back to the table, sat, picked up the letter. Read Alderton's final line again. "Immediate expenses may be advanced from estate funds pending resolution." "I'm not taking your money," she said. "It's not mine. It's the trust." "Still no." Edmund regarded her steadily. "You'd rather leave?" No. The word came fast, fierce. I'm not leaving. Not for Gerald Hartwell. Not for anyone. His mouth curved faintly. Good. Alderton himself arrived 3 days later, travelling post from London in a carriage that looked as tired as he did. They met in the study. Edmund behind the desk, Vivienne in the chair opposite, Alderton standing with his leather portfolio. The solicitor was thin, grey at the temples, with the lined face of a man who had spent decades watching families dismantle themselves over inheritances. Hartwell's argument rests on mental capacity, Alderton said without preamble. He claims Lord James was unduly influenced. Grieving widow, overbearing brother-in-law, undue pressure. Vivienne's hands clenched in her lap. James was himself until the last fortnight, she said. The doctor's notes confirm it. Alderton nodded. They do. But notes can be argued. Hartwell's man is thorough. Edmund leaned forward, elbows on the desk. What does he actually want? Alderton glanced between them, reading the room. The trust, Your Grace, and... A careful pause. Her ladyship gone from this house. Vivienne felt Edmund stiffen beside her. She kept her gaze on Alderton. Why? She asked. The timing suggests calculation, my lady. A widow residing 6 months with the Duke. The county talks. Hartwell's solicitor has been making inquiries in Bath, London. Questions about the arrangement. Heat rose in her face. Not shame, but the deliberate cruelty of it turned to weapon. He's using gossip, she said. Alderton inclined his head. Gossip with legal teeth. Stay, and the questions grow. Leave now, and the clause fails regardless of outcome. Edmund's voice cut clean. What is the fastest resolution? Alderton spread his hands. Withdraw the challenge, or... He hesitated. Leverage. Vivienne looked at Edmund. He met her eyes, steady. I'll handle it, he said. That evening, after Alderton had dined and departed for the village inn, they sat in the small parlour off the library. Firelight danced across the walls. Rain pattered the windows. Tea sat untouched on the low table between them. Vivienne stared into the flames. He's right, she said finally. People are talking. Let them. She turned. Edmund, this is your home now. His voice was low, certain. If you want it. Her breath caught. He reached across the space between the chairs, took her hand. She felt the callus on his thumb, the faint roughness from rains and estate work. Real. Solid. I mean it, he said. Stay. Not for paper and lawyers, for us. His fingers laced through hers. She turned her palm up, held him. I'm staying, she said. The fire popped. Rain drummed steady. He lifted her hand, pressed his lips to her knuckles. The touch lingered. She felt it travel up her arm, settle in her chest. She closed her eyes. The rider came at dawn the next week. Edmund read the note in the breakfast room doorway, face unreadable, handed it across the table. Gerald Hartwell had withdrawn. Alderton's note. Influential parties made their position clear. Challenge dropped. Trust intact. Vivienne read it twice. Wentworth? She asked. Edmund shrugged, mouth twitching. He has strong opinions on family matters. You wrote him. I may have mentioned the situation. She laughed, real, sudden. Thank you, she said. His gaze held hers. You owe me nothing, he said. But his thumb brushed her wrist where her sleeve had pulled back. I owe you more than you think, she said softly. Life at Ashborne settled deeper. Breakfasts stretched longer. Afternoons overlapped, her in the library, him reviewing ledgers at the table across from her. Evenings found them together without plan, music room, garden, firelit parlour. One night, returning from a walk, their hands brushed in the corridor. Neither let go. Catherine saw from the stairs, smiled faintly, said nothing. Mrs. Greaves passed with a tray, eyes on the floor. The house adjusted. A week later, Edmund found her in the library. Come with me, he said. He took her hand. Led her down the east corridor. The door to James's room stood ajar. Light spilled from within. Chapter 7. The Sketch from 1796. The door at the end of the east corridor stood ajar. Edmund had not yet touched the handle. Light spilled from the narrow opening in a soft, warm wedge, falling across the stone floor like something that had been waiting a long time to be let out. Vivienne stood beside him. Her candle was burning low, the flame pulling sideways in the still air of the corridor. She could feel the heat of it near her fingers. She could feel the heat of him near her side. "After you," he said. His voice was level, his eyes were not. She stepped across the threshold. The room breathed. Not the sour breath of a sealed space too long untouched, but something warmer and more complicated than that. A room that had been quietly maintained by people who understood that cleaning a space was not the same as erasing it. Beeswax on the floors. Wool blankets folded at the foot of the bed, their creases pressed with the care of someone who could not bring themselves to put them away entirely. And underneath all of it, ink, paper, the particular dry warmth of many books in a small space. James. She did not say his name. She didn't need to. She crossed to the bookshelves first, because that was what her feet chose without consultation. The spines were worn in the uneven way of books that had been taken down and replaced many times over many years, some pristine at their edges, others soft as cloth from handling. Poetry beside farming theory. A complete set of Gibbon beside a slim novel with a folded corner halfway through, marking the place he never came back to. A travel journal from Italy, the cover water-stained, the binding cracked from years of being opened flat. She pressed her fingertips to the spines as she moved along the shelf. Behind her, Edmund closed the door. She heard him set his candle on the mantel, heard him stand still. She understood that he was giving her the room first, letting her find it before he had to share it. It was, she thought, a very Edmund kind of kindness. The sketch almost escaped her notice. She was reaching for the travel journal, wondering which roads James had taken, what he had thought of the light in Florence, when she saw it, wedged sideways between two volumes at the end of the shelf. A folded piece of paper, soft with age, the kind of thing stored carelessly in the confidence that it would always be there. She drew it out, pencil on cream paper, quick, sure lines, the work of a hand that drew without laboring over it, the way some people hum while they think. Two boys at a wide table, bent toward each other over something between them, a book perhaps or a letter. One leaned forward, mouth open, in the middle of a point. The other had his brow furrowed, not in disagreement, but concentration, the way a person looks when they are genuinely listening. She recognized them the way you recognize music you haven't heard in years, not through logic, but through the body. E&J, Ashborne Hall, summer 1796. Edmund was 16 in this sketch. James 14. Her throat tightened. "Come and look," she said. He crossed the room to her. She held the sketch up between them, and for a moment neither of them spoke. The candlelight made the pencil lines shift slightly, the figures almost alive. His breath went out slow and long. "I had forgotten," he said. "Your father?" "Yes." He looked at the page without blinking. "We were arguing about the drainage maps in the library. He appeared in the doorway. He never said he was drawing. James must have taken it from the sketchbook later." "Of course he did," she said softly. A pause. The house was very quiet. "He kept it here," she said, "on his shelf, where he could see it every day." Edmund's hand rested on the shelf beside hers. The back of his fingers brushed the back of hers. Neither of them moved to close the distance, and neither moved away. The sketch trembled slightly between them, alive in the low light. She set it back carefully, exactly where it had been. They moved through the room the way people move through a place they are trying to memorize before it closes again. She went to the desk. An open journal lay there, James's hand mid-sentence. The ink trailed into a blur where the quill had stilled. She did not read it. She looked at the shape of the words, the particular slant of his letters, familiar as a voice. "He never finished entries," she said. "He'd start writing and end up thinking." The thinking was always more interesting to him than the record of it. Edmund stood beside her, looking down at the page. "He sent me a letter once," he said. "That was 4 pages of questions and no conclusions. He apologized at the end for the length." A beat. "I kept it." "Where?" "Upstairs." He glanced up. I've kept all of them." She turned to look at him. In the candlelight, his face was open in the way it was becoming more open. The careful restraint present, but no longer total, the warmth of him visible at its edges. "Have you read them again?" she asked. "Since he died?" "No," he said. "I haven't been able to." He looked at the desk. "I thought reading them again would mean acknowledging it was finished, that there would be no more." "I know," she said. "I felt the same about mine." A long pause. "Did it help?" he asked. "When you finally did?" She thought about the cream ribbon letters, the last two lines, the way she had sat on the edge of her bed and held them to her chest. "Yes," she said, "and no. Both things at once." He nodded, as though that were exactly the answer he had expected and feared. At the mantel, the stopped clock kept its 3:10, 2 letters propped against it, her writing on one, his on the other. Both sealed. Both still. She reached out without thinking. Her fingers hovered over hers. "Not yet," she whispered. Edmund's hand covered hers. The warmth of it spread up her arm. "Nor I," he said. They stayed like that for a moment, his hand over hers. The clock stopped between them, the candles burning lower. Then he turned to her. "Vivienne," he said. She looked up at him. The room was very small now, the space between them smaller. His eyes held hers with the steady, unhurried attention he gave to things that mattered to him, the kind of attention she had once misread as coldness and now understood as its opposite entirely. "Thank you," he said, "for being here. Tonight." "Where else would I be?" she said softly. His hand lifted from hers, rose to her face. She felt his palm against her cheek, warm and slightly rough, the thumb moving once along her cheekbone. She let her eyes close. When she opened them, he was closer. He kissed her. Not tentatively, not as something borrowed from the portrait gallery and not yet fully owned. This was certain, unhurried. His arm came around her and she leaned into him fully, her hand pressing against his chest, feeling the quick, unguarded beat of his heart. When they parted, they were both breathing unevenly. His forehead came to rest against hers. His hand stayed at her jaw. "James would say something unbearable right now," she managed. "He would," Edmund said. His voice had changed, lower, undone at the edges. He'd be right about all of it. He usually was. "Yes." She stayed in the circle of his arm. The candles guttered, the clock watched. Outside, the moors held their own quiet. She thought of James writing letters in this room, watching this same dark through this same window, dreaming of an elm that still stood. She thought, he knew. He always knew. They left together. He closed the door, but did not lock it. At the place where the east corridor met the main hall, he drew her back gently by their joined hands. "Stay," he said, a word he had said before. Different now. She stepped closer. "Yes," she said. Dawn came grey and soft through the tall windows. Downstairs, a letter from Alderton waited on the hall table. Gerald Hartwell had withdrawn his challenge. The trust was secure. She read it twice, then handed it to Edmund. "The 6 months end tomorrow," she said. He set the letter down. His hand found her face. "Stay anyway," he said. She already knew her answer. Chapter 8. The day she chose to stay, May, arrived in Derbyshire like a debt finally paid. Not all at once. The north of England did not give up its winter easily. It released it in increments grudgingly, a degree at a time. But by the first week of May, the moors had softened from brown to a tentative green. The oaks in the park were putting out their first small leaves, and the light was staying past 7 o'clock, as though it too had finally decided to commit. Vivienne woke on the morning of the last day, knowing the date before she opened her eyes. 6 months to the day. She lay still for a moment, hands flat on the coverlet, looking up at the ceiling. The room around her was familiar in a way it had not been on the first night, when every sound the housemaid was foreign, and every shadow carried the weight of obligation. Now she knew which floorboard creaked near the window. She knew the particular quality of morning light through the east-facing curtains, the way it arrived pale and tentative, and then committed itself by degrees. She knew the shape of the house around her. She got up, dressed carefully, not hastily. Catherine was already at the window, tidying the sill where the spring air had pushed a fine dust of pollen across the stone. "It's a good day," Catherine said quietly, without specifying for what. "Yes," Vivian said. "It is." Edmund was in the study. He had opened the window, a thing he rarely did before full spring, and the morning air moved through the room, cool and green-scented, turning the pages of his correspondence with the light touch of something playful. He was at the desk writing, but he set the pen down when she appeared in the doorway, and looked at her across the room with the directness she had come to think of as entirely his. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning," she said. She came in and sat across from him, in the chair that had become hers over the last months by the same gradual, unannounced process by which most things between them had become theirs. No declaration, just accumulation. The breakfast things were arranged on the corner of the desk. She poured her tea. He moved his letters to the side to give her room. They ate for a while in the quiet that belonged to them now. Not the careful, loaded silence of the early weeks, full of things unsaid and positions defended, but the open, easy quiet of two people who had stopped spending energy on distance. The morning light moved slowly across the desk between them. She set down her cup. "Today is the last day," she said. "I know," he said. His pen was still in his hand, but he was not writing. He was watching her with that patient, particular attention of his, the kind that had once seemed like absence, and was in fact its opposite. She had thought about how to say this, had arranged words in her head last night, and the night before, and let them fall apart and started over. All the ways to phrase a thing that did not need phrasing, that only needed to be said out loud so that they both knew it was real. In the end, the words arrived simply, the way true things do. "I'm not leaving," she said. He went very still. "Not today," she said. "Not next week, not—" She paused. "Not unless you ask me to." His pen touched the desk surface, a small, quiet motion. His eyes had not moved from her face. She pressed on because she had learned that he needed things said completely, needed the whole shape of a thing before he would let himself respond. "I came here because the clause required it," she said. "I stayed because—" She looked at her hands, then back at him. "Because James asked you to take care of me, and you tried, in your particular impossible way, and it worked. Because the letters told me who you actually were. Because of the portrait gallery and the study, and the room at the end of the east corridor." She paused. "Because I look forward to breakfast. I haven't looked forward to breakfast since James died." The morning was very quiet around them. Edmund set the pen down fully. He stood. He came around the desk slowly, and she rose to meet him, and when he stopped before her, the distance between them was nothing, the span of a breath, a heartbeat. He lifted his hands and held her face in both of them, his thumbs tracing her cheekbones with the careful attention he brought to everything that mattered to him. She looked up at him. "Stay," he said. 2 syllables. The same word he had said before, in corridors and doorways, always a question dressed as a statement. This time there was nothing dressed about it. It was simply what it was. "Yes," she said. He kissed her, not the way of corridors or candle-lit rooms where discovery might lurk. Fully, his hands in her hair, her palms against his chest, feeling the sure and rapid beat beneath. When they parted, foreheads together, both breathing unevenly, she laughed, low and unguarded. "James," she said, "is somewhere being absolutely insufferable about this." "He has earned it," Edmund said. "He has," she agreed. The day unfolded with the unhurried ease of days that do not need to prove themselves. They rode out in the morning across the parkland, where the ground was soft enough now to show the horses' tracks in the turf. She had grown comfortable on Ashbourne's horses over the months, less stiff, less formal, more willing to let the animal move at its own pace through the landscape. Edmund rode beside her, pointing out changes, a section of dry stone wall rebuilt since winter, a field turned for spring planting, the tenant cottage at the north boundary, where a new baby had arrived the previous month. He knew the name of the baby. He knew the name of every child on the estate. She had not expected that months ago. She had no trouble believing it now. At the northern boundary of the park, the elm stood in new leaf. They stopped beneath it without discussing it. The horses dropped their heads to the spring grass. The branches overhead moved slowly in the light air, the young leaves translucent where the sun came through them. "He used to read up there," Edmund said, looking at the broad horizontal branch 15 feet above. "You told me," she said. "I know." He looked at her sideways. "I find I like saying it." She understood. The saying of it was different now. Not an excavation of grief, but a simple carrying of him forward into ordinary days. "He had terrible taste in reading positions," she said. "I once found him in a kitchen cabinet." Edmund turned to stare at her. "We were playing something," she said. "He got absorbed. He never came out." He laughed, the real laugh, the one that still surprised her with how completely it changed his face. Low and genuine, unguarded as the sky. She kept the sound of it somewhere in her chest. They returned to the house before noon and ate lunch at the small table in the morning room with the windows open to the garden. Afterward, she went to the library and he to the estate office, and the hours between were full of the sounds of a house being lived in. In the late afternoon, she came upon him in the portrait gallery. She had not planned to be there. She was returning from the garden with a handful of stems. The kitchen garden had the first of the spring herbs, and she had taken to cutting them for her room, and the east corridor seemed the natural route back. She stopped at the gallery entrance when she saw him. He stood before James's portrait with his hands at his sides, looking at his brother. The afternoon light came in at an angle, golden and long, falling across the canvas and picking out the warmth the painter had captured in James's eyes. Edmund's face was open, not performing, not managing, simply present. She watched him for a moment without speaking. He became aware of her the way he always did, some change in the air, some sixth sense she had stopped being surprised by. He did not step back or rearrange his expression. He held out his hand. She crossed the gallery and took it. They stood before James together, as they had months before in the dark with candles, and as they had been standing in one way or another since the night she found him here. "He looks pleased," she said. "He looks smug," Edmund said. She leaned her head against his shoulder. "Do you think," she said, "that he knew, really knew?" Edmund was quiet for a moment. "I think," he said slowly, "that he knew everything he needed to know. He was only waiting for the rest of us to catch up." She looked at James's half-turned smile. The edge of laughter caught mid-arrival and felt something settle in her chest that had been unsettled for a very long time. Not the absence of grief. Grief was still there, would always be there, the particular watermark of loving someone well, but grief and something else, something warm and forward-facing, something that had his blessing in every word of every letter he had ever written. That night at dinner, Edmund placed a small box beside her plate. She looked at it, then at him. "What is this?" "Open it," he said. Inside, on a bed of velvet, a simple ring, plain gold, the kind worn smooth by time. On the inner face, 2 letters engraved in small, careful script, E and J. Her breath left her. "It was my mother's," Edmund said. "She left it to James. He left it—" He paused. "He left it with Alderton, with instructions." She turned the ring in her fingers. The candles made it gleam. "He told Alderton to give it to you," she said. "He told Alderton to give it to you," Edmund confirmed, "when you were ready." She looked up. "And Alderton," she said, "gave it to you." Edmund held her gaze. "He said the delivery seemed more appropriate this way." She laughed softly with tears she did not try to stop. She held the ring out to him. He took it, held it over her hand. "Vivienne," he said, "stay. Not for paper, not for clauses. Not because James asked." His eyes were steady and dark and entirely sure. "Stay for this." She felt the cool weight of the ring slide onto her finger, felt his hand close around hers. "Yes," she said, "for this." Later, with the house quiet and the spring dark soft outside the windows, she stood in the portrait gallery alone for a moment. James looked back at her from the canvas, half-turned, that familiar smile hovering. She pressed her fingers to the ring on her hand. "Well done," she said to him. The painted eyes said nothing, but the warmth in them she thought was new. "The end. Thank you for being here. If this story found you at the right moment, If you felt it, leave a comment and tell me which chapter stayed with you. Where are you watching from? Subscribe. Every story starts with someone who decided to stay.
I made a promise in the rain that day. I swore I'd never come back this way. I said your name like it was something to blame, something I could leave behind. But time has a way of bending truth and leading hearts where they don't choose. And every road I tried to outrun brought me back to you. I held my anger like it was mine, but it was grief I couldn't define. And all the things I thought I knew were only half of what was true. And I stayed, even when I said I'd walk away, even when I couldn't face your name. I stayed, and in the silence I could see the pain you carried next to me. And somehow it felt the same. You never tried to change my mind, you never crossed a single line. Just stood there quiet in the storm, holding more than you would show. And every letter left behind spoke a truth I couldn't deny. The love had lived between the lines long before I knew. You stayed back when I pushed away, carried things you couldn't say, and piece by piece I came to see you were never my enemy. And I stayed, even when I said I'd walk away, even when I was afraid to stay. I stayed, and in the quiet I found truth. Everything I ran from led to you. If love doesn't fade, it just transforms, then maybe it was here all along. In every loss, in every scar, you were never far. And I stayed, not for the past or what we lost, but for the truth it finally cost. I stayed, and now I know what I couldn't see. It wasn't the end, it was leading me. I swore I'd never come back again, but staying is where I